This week on A Lively Experiment, we have all things General Assembly, what made it and what didn't in the waning days of the session. And the Providence schools get more money from the city, but will it be enough?
A Lively Experiment is generously underwritten by...
Hi, I'm John Hazenwhite Jr. For over 30 years, A Lively Experiment has provided insight and analysis of the political issues that face Rhode Islanders. I'm a proud supporter of this great program and Rhode Island PBS.
Joining us with the analysis, Boston Globe columnist Dan McGowan, Sue Cienki, National Committeewoman for the Rhode Island Republican Party, and political contributor Bob Walsh. Welcome to Lively. I'm Jim Hummel, and we appreciate you spending part of your weekend with us. Strange things happen on the last day or two of the General Assembly session every year. After moving at a sometimes glacial pace, legislation endorsed by the leadership races through committees and onto the House or Senate floor. Other bills that were seemingly dead at the beginning of the week come off life support and all of a sudden arrive on lawmakers' desks ready for a vote. Bob, let me begin with you because you're the banker on this show. Some people don't know that Bob was a banker in his former life. Citizens Bank had asked for some tax breaks. It seemed dead a week ago. Why did it pass?
It passed because it was logical to pass it, that the state makes more money if they stay than if they leave. I don't think people understand the full story that Citizens was one of the companies that took advantage, so to speak, of an old tax credit opportunity that changed during COVID because they have a lot of people telecommuting and everything else. So what they asked the state to do was to change the tax assessment to what Massachusetts is changing it to and just base it on income because they felt, and Massachusetts felt, that banks were being discriminated against by taxing them on income, real estate, employment, and everything else. So they made a logical appeal much earlier, I think, than it became newsworthy. I think there was a distraction because in a totally unrelated scenario, they were also selling a building and the state was looking at that building. And I think those two things got conflated in the media, but they were two separate transactions. So once it got analyzed and people saw there was some logic to it, it was passed fairly overwhelmingly in both chambers.
There was a threat to leave, but they just built a new huge headquarters in Johnston.
Right, and when Bob talks about it, there was the tax process, and if we're going to stay competitive with Massachusetts, we should match them in tax. And not only in that, but sales tax, income tax, let's match Massachusetts so we don't lose anybody. So if you're doing that, the tax sale, but the second process was they wanted to purchase land in East
Riverside,
Providence and
Riverside.
Riverside.
An existing facility, but that was unrelated to the original
So that was,
request.
I think, a huge holdup in why is the state going to spend more than what the property was assessed at? So there was some confusion.
I don't even think that was true because the cost that we saw was to buy and rehabilitate the building. Like if you buy my house for X and you want to put in a new kitchen, which you should, it's going to be a lot more than that. And
maybe the two issues got conflated.
Yeah, they got conflated.
Got conflated, and it's that's
and then it settled down, and they
became.
looked at it as a business transaction, and they did it.
But there's always the possibility that you're targeting one specific business, and then it turns into crony capitalism. But as far as the tax goes, if you're matching Massachusetts, that's what we should be doing all the time to attract more business.
I like that because they have a surtax on the rich, so we can talk about that.
For that. No, not except for that. Because guess what happens? We get more population.
Yeah, only in education.
I thought I had her in full agreement.
So what about this?
No, not on that tax policy.
I know you did not intend.
I think you guys are both exactly right. I think it got messy because of the East Providence situation. Bob's right. It was entirely separate, but it came together. The stories that journalists were writing were two stories in the same article, right? East Providence sale versus this taxation thing. I mean, one of the things is it's not just Massachusetts. The majority of states at this point are moving towards in this direction of a kind of a single sales factor, as they call it, and so it made sense for that. But it was a bit messy, and at the end of the session, you never like to see at the end, the last week, this kind of thing happen. I thought the chamber deserves a lot of credit. The Providence Chamber of Commerce, really put a call out last Thursday, last Friday, to say, hey, there's a chance that citizens might leave. And from what folks were saying behind the scenes, that threat was on the table. Whether it was legitimate or not, I think you never know.
It would have been a logical business decision, because all you have to do is move your headquarters. They could have three people in Massachusetts say, we're the new headquarters.
Right, and you also think about the unease. Hasbro has been talking about that for a long time. Textron, the big companies, CVS, right?
You know what the cost-benefit analysis to move versus staying here and paying a higher tax rate.
They were changing the other rule, so it was kind of cost neutral when you gave up one tax thing and adopted the one that Massachusetts had. It's, net, we're probably in the same place as we were before with Citizens.
All right, Dan, let me stay with you. A lot of sound and fury from the union, the Correctional Officers Union, Wayne Salisbury Jr., controversial candidate. Some people take that as a badge of honor if the union doesn't like you. And at the end of the day, there were some senators voted against it. They mounted a furious campaign against him. At the end, he's going to be the new corrections director. Am I missing something in this story?
No, I don't think so. I mean, look, there was a furious effort from the Correctional Officers Union. I think typically the Correctional Officers Union does have the ear of a lot of General Assembly members, but I think they kind of shot their shot and missed in this way. It was clear going back a couple of weeks ago when this campaign kind of started. Somebody said to me in the Senate, once it makes the agenda for a confirmation hearing, that means the deal's been cut.
Especially on the last day.
Yeah, it's very, very unlikely that you're going to, fight it down. And I think, again, they missed. They overwhelmingly sailed through the Judiciary Committee, and then it pretty much overwhelmingly sailed through in the Senate.
Yeah, I think that the correctional officers were probably worried that this is a gentleman that had been fired twice from Wyatt, and he definitely has a different approach than what they were looking for, more conciliatory towards the prisoners rather than taking the side of the correctional union. But he's their leader now, so let's see how it goes.
I think Richard Ferruccio, who's the president of the Brotherhood of Correctional Officers, is a brilliant political strategist. If you go into a fight and you know you're not going to lose one fight, why are you fighting? You're fighting so you can surface the issues and put everyone on notice. There's more gang violence at the ACI. There are more drugs getting into the ACI. There are and they are way understaffed, and they're locking in a lot of the correctional officers, which means they have to do double and triple shifts, even if they don't want to, because they don't have enough people. And he used the opportunity to surface all three of those issues and put everyone on notice. You pick this guy. Here are the problems that we need to address. Now we've got to sit down and address them. So I would recommend to both parties. And we'll be back in a year, right? I would recommend to both parties that they start that process immediately. I don't know if we need an Auditor General for the state of Rhode Island, which is on the list of topics today.
Inspector General.
Inspector General.
But
yes, we have an Auditor General, but you never know it.
But we need a statewide mediator who can jump into situations like that and say, okay, what's done is done. You've got a new director. You've got a union that surfaced all these issues. Let's sit down and figure it out.
Mr. Walsh, you teed that up beautifully, because I want to talk about Inspector General.
Yeah, I think it's sorely needed. 44 states in the United States have one. Why we don't have one, I think that the Republicans did a really good job of bringing down the Inspector General from Massachusetts to make a case for why we would need one. There are so many issues here that could have been avoided or could be resolved with an Inspector General. They more than make up for it. I'm a limited government type of person, and I'm actually promoting another thing, but they pay for themselves. They absolutely pay for themselves.
And it's not just the Republicans this year. They got by. Now, maybe not, I wouldn't call them backbenchers. They brought on some Democrats, which I think helps, which helps make the argument.
They really brought in some very good people to testify on behalf, and they really root out waste, fraud, and abuse. It would be very beneficial to the state.
I'm with Sue on this one. I think they should have an Inspector General. I will say I don't think it removes politics from the process. I think you'd have a debate over over who gets to be the inspector general. You'd have a debate over what the inspector general goes after. So politics would still be at play, but I completely agree. I think it would be nice to have a little bit more oversight over the agencies. We're seeing what's going on, and we're still seeing Rhode Island have to pay back for UHIP, things like that. So I think it would make sense to have somebody who, whose full-time job was to be looking at that.
To pay attention. And you're right, and you have to be careful as where that office is housed. There was a push, maybe it should be put under the useless role of lieutenant governor. Should it be in that office? I think it should be totally independent. Of course, in this state, nothing is ever totally independent, but there has to be some type of
But the
oversight.
leadership has brushed the proponents off like a gnat every year.
And this is an instance where a constitutional convention might be great. Look at the things that people want. They want an IG.
She's got everything I want to talk about.
They want an IG. They want term limits. They want all these things. Line item veto, and the General Assembly. The leaders in the General Assembly.
But I think it's a hollow argument. We've heard the speaker many times. We have an auditor general. Well, he answers to the General Assembly. We have an attorney general who doesn't have enough staff to go after the criminal stuff. Is it as easy as they don't want the nose under the camel's tent?
No, we've got
camel nose under the tent?
And I'm kind of agnostic on the issue, but I don't think it's the great panacea. Like most of the grand reforms over time, and from going all the way back to downsizing the legislature. Wow, things are going to be different now. That's the people who are still upset are still upset. I am agnostic on an inspector general for all the reasons, Sue, that I identified. Where do you house it? What authority do they have? Theoretically, all those powers exist. There are people who are elected officials already who raise their hand and say, I think this is a bad idea, and it still happens. 38 studios would still have happened despite all the objections, because there was only one rep who said, I think this is a bad idea. We still have all these
He likes
things
it because his last name was what?
Bob Watson. Yeah. No, Watson. But he was your,
I said
the initials.
But if there was an inspector general in place, could somebody have called him about the Washington Bridge and saying, there's some inspectors that aren't getting their job done. Look around.
Sure, but in fairness to, I suppose, the argument against, we get calls, reporters get calls, the state police get calls every day about, hey, there's some nefarious thing happening. You can't take up everything. And so I don't know that the Washington Bridge would be an example where the Inspector General would have actually had a lot to do. I think, look, the after-hours report on a 38 studios would be really helpful. We ended up actually getting some version of that. And there's lots of things across government that actually go completely unnoticed that we end up paying for that maybe you'd have an Inspector General to be able to,
I'm truly agnostic on it because I get all the arguments for it. I don't see where functional government can't get to the same place. And by the way, free media, like a free and open press. Someone calls Dan McGowan and says there's a problem. Or the Hummel report. The Hummel report actually surfaces a lot of these issues.
Absolutely.
We could be deputy inspector generals, right?
Yeah, but the bigger problem is when you say the nose under the tent, they don't even want to reform the APRA requests, which is outrageous that they're withholding. The government is withholding information from the press and the public. So that's a problem.
Well, now you've done two segues. Are we on constitutional APRA?
There was so much to talk about.
But and you're seeing the clock ticking. But you look at what if they looked at the JCLS budget? I get the feeling just from a human standpoint, it's like the speaker's like, we got some extra jobs, people walking around the hall. They're worried maybe that's going to be inspected or somebody's going to say, you could trim 10% and not miss it at all.
Sure, wouldn't you? I think that's exactly the challenge here. And it's why it's the case for an inspector general, because the concern is always where power is and where money is, right? And if you have a system you kind of like, you don't want to change.
That's why you don't want the line item veto, right? Right? It's the same argument about the line item veto.
And that's right. If you're able to give jobs and goodies to people that will intend vote for you, is it the only good vote is one that can continue to be bought? That's what we're dealing with here.
Go ahead. Final thought.
There are three issues on the table. So
we're taping.
All over the place.
We are taping on a Friday morning. About 7 hours ago, the General Assembly hit the gavel for the last time. It was 1:30 in the morning, and they did pass. It usually happens in the years ending in 4. It'll be put on the ballot. A constitutional convention should happen every 10 years. We haven't had one since 1986. And we talked a little about this on the show last year. Lobbying gets involved, and there's going to be a lot of money spent. Among the things you need to vote on Your thoughts on a constitutional
Yeah,
convention?
I think we should have one. I think that there are things that the people want. One is term limits, the inspector general, the line item veto. They would all make the government function a little bit better. Not perfect, because nothing is ever perfect. And I always say, there's no fear in the Constitutional Convention because you get 2 bites at the apple. Like whatever comes out of the Constitutional Convention, people have to vote on. So you do get a second vote at the apple. And right now, anything the Democrats want, they get in the General Assembly. So this is about people. Yeah, you do.
No, well,
You
but,
get
all
it.
right,
You
this is
get
funny. This
whatever
is
you want.
my third cycle. Plus, I had to deal with the aftermath of the first one when I first was getting involved in politics in Rhode Island, and it's. There's no other way to say it. It's funny because here's the vision, right? We're going to have something different because we're going to have a constitutional convention that's going to put all this stuff on the ballot. Oh, how are the delegates elected? In the 75 state representative districts that already exist. Oh, how's your team doing in those districts? Well, we have 8 of them, but we're going to lose 3 in this next cycle. So why would it be any different, the electoral outcomes of that process, than what is absolutely there? I saw how the Constitutional Convention in the 80s was controlled by a very, very conservative Speaker of the House. That ended up putting the choice issue on the ballot.
Was
Stop
that
14.
Maddie Smith?
Maddie Smith.
Yeah.
And there was the chair
Kevin McKenna.
Kevin McKenna.
The late great Kevin
who
McKenna.
were both incredibly active in the anti-choice movement. Kevin's passed.
But
Maddie
the
now.
check and balance was, Bob, it got voted down.
Yeah, but in other
Ultimately,
words,
people said-
and people had to spend a lot of money defending. But why would they think that if the legislature has a tendency towards these issues, it would be any different than the
Reflective
existing
of what they're going to vote on.
So again, it's another potential false reform, and there is potential with the ability to spend big money on advertising now. There is still the potential for some level of mischief on whatever question 11 is that gets buried on the. I don't see it.
I love interesting, and this would be very interesting, and so let's get after it and do it. I think it's fun. As a journalist, it would be fun to cover. The debates are fun to cover. Bob's got a very good point about this. Does it change? Does it change anything? I don't know the answer to that. I probably not. But as a journalist, it would be really fun to cover
When I was
everything
still
that happens.
working in the union.
And it's fun to see what the issues are that come up.
Would voter initiative come on the ballot?
Yeah.
Is that something that they've talked about for years?
Yeah, they
and
talked
it's
about it.
never
So
going to
it-
happen
right.
legislatively.
But
I'll
it's-
give you the
it will-
one-line lobbying against it. I'm against it, but if they have it, I'll probably run to be a delegate. And I got 74
He's
friends
going to
that'll
run
do
to
that.
be chair of the Constitutional
Both of them are going to be
Convention.
delegates.
We can run against each other.
They had. I used to when Ken Block first ran for governor, and I know I'm going to get this line wrong. His tagline was something like, "Because Rhode Island needs to be changed or needs change." Nobody in Rhode Island wants change, so I mean that was not a line.
Yeah, change is very difficult here.
Exactly.
Change is very
What
difficult.
was it? That ad they used to have years ago, from oil to gas or gas to oil. It would be. Because changing is chancy. That's Rhode Island. That could be our.
On the other hand, if it happens, I will run and I will try and get an amendment.
Run?
Yeah, I will try and get an amendment to make education a constitutional right, which we've been trying through the legislature for years. So if it does happen,
you could be
that
an
will be my
embedded
issue.
panelist. We could have
Yeah,
you
yeah.
in the
That's right.
constitutional.
Tell us how it's really
But you
working.
look at the mid '80s.
Live from the
You look at the mid '80s. Link Chafee, Bruce Sunderland. A lot of people who weren't really known in 1985 went on kind of to launch.
Well,
it.
I can't say that I know that because I was born in 1986.
That makes me feel very old.
He's the baby
What
panelist.
other issues would you like to see brought up?
Well, those are my top 3. Line item veto, term limits, and an inspector general. Let's get them done. I think it would be beneficial. Do I think any change? I
don't know
say,
if those are all constitutional issues, but I suppose you can put anything you want.
You can
in the
put anything you want.
Constitution.
Yeah. And I think that Bob is right. Sometimes we think, oh, this is going to be the thing that's going to make huge change.
And then it doesn't.
And
No,
then
and
it
that's-
doesn't, because change
They
is
said
gonna
the
become-
same
a
thing.
distraction.
They
That's
said the
the
same
worst.
thing about the Judicial Nominating Committee when it wasn't the Grand Committee of the House or whatever. This is
same
going to
thing
take
with
politics out of judges. How's that going?
They said
right?
the same thing about
But
the
it's-
ethics committee.
that is a better. It is
Oh, it's
a
a better
better
system, but it's
than
not
is-
a panacea.
Well, the
No,
ethics
and it
commission
could
to
be
become a
changed.
political football.
Yeah.
And it makes some people just
But
not run
that's
because they
got
want to do
gutted by the
disclosures of all their
General
stocks.
Yeah, their
Yeah.
powers got gutted by the General
No,
Assembly. though, Bob.
but
I mean,
they
are-
have
They
powers.
they don't really have any power.
They write their own rules. They sit as judge and jury over the people they bring before them.
Yeah, but it's okay for these lawmakers who have direct interest in legislation. It's okay for you to vote on that.
That's the
no
class
problem.
exemption. Otherwise, you'd have nobody doing anything
Yeah,
anytime.
class
Just because some
exemption.
reporters get
Some
mad
days
about
the
it.
class exemption is 10. Some days it's 165.
Depends
it's all
on the
over
class.
the place. It depends. Yeah, it depends on who they are.
All right, another big issue at the General Assembly, housing. Late last night, the ADU, the accessory dwelling unit, sometimes called the granny flats, that basically you could put an extra unit on your own house. That passed. There was opposition in the Senate last year. As I was driving in today, this is Joe Sakarchi's big thing. I thought, what a great name for a band, Joey and the ADUs. What do you think?
Well, I think it's a big
It
win.
could pass now, right?
It could, yeah, absolutely. Put that on the Constitutional Convention. They'd love it. Look,
Is that significant?
It's a big win for the Speaker. I think it is fairly significant. I think what I was most surprised about was how close it was in the Senate. It wasn't, you look at some of the senators.
21 to 15,
Yeah,
right?
who voted, I think it was
when
20,
do you
yeah.
ever
For
see
the
a vote-
ADU issue.
For the ADU
But when do
issue,
you ever see
yeah.
a vote get to the floor that's close?
No, and you saw, interestingly, on the no votes, you saw kind of a combination of progressives. You saw some of the more conservative members, different parts of the state voting against it. So that was kind of interesting. But I do think, look, the Speaker has been right about this. He's been at the forefront of the issue of needing to expand housing in the state. This is one very easy and clear way to do it. I know the fear is around Airbnbs and how you rent out those. Does it change the character of a neighborhood, things like that. But this is going to be able to, at some point, put more people in houses. I think it makes sense.
Bob?
Change is hard, right? And I think you're right. There was a combination of folks against it just out of concern, out of misunderstanding. I know one of the questions they asked in the endgame debate was, would this allow trailers or whatever? And they changed that to a may, not shall. But we have to do anything and everything we can to address the housing problem, and this package taken as a whole. And that was only one out of 15 bills the Speaker put forth. I think the Speaker, showed phenomenal leadership on a particular issue that is crucial to the state right now, and he got it done. So that's where the
His
credit
pocketbook.
is.
Crucial to his pocketbook.
But
The
there's been
ADUs
chafing from the local communities
I
on
think
this.
the issue with the ADUs is most cities and towns allow the granny flats. They allow them already. So to say that it was a granny issue and to sell it to senior citizens will allow you to build onto your house and live there. My issue is if it's not owner occupied, that's where you have problems. If you do not have the owner occupied in the house where you have the accessory dwelling unit, you may run into some issues. You may have crack houses in your neighborhood, and that's when the local people get upset. Like, who's living
Maybe
there?
Granny's running the crack house.
Maybe Granny.
I'm
is
less
living
interested
there.
in crack houses than I am in the Airbnb problem.
Yeah.
Which I think is.
I think you kind of went all the way to the end of the spectrum of the crack house topic. So- But I think, the rental, the short-term rental thing, very good. The short-term rental thing is, it's going to have to be addressed, and if it becomes a problem, they're going to fix it.
Let's do this. I don't want to short you on outrages and/or kudos. Dan, let's begin with you this week.
So I before the Globe, worked at Channel 12 for about 6 years, had a great experience there. But when I started, I was 26 years old, made about $38,000 and was paying about a third of my entire income was going to rent.
Which was a lot lower back then, right?
Yeah, fair enough. Had to sign a contract that said that I couldn't go work for the Providence Journal, that I couldn't go work for WJAR, couldn't work for Channel 6 for a very extended period of time because of a non-compete, right? The legislature addressed that last night. I think it's good news, but it's outrageous that television reporters have to sign these non-compete agreements. I'm glad that the legislature finally addressed it because you got a lot of, we do not have trade secrets. Teaching, what am I going to do? Teach people how Tim White ties his ties? I don't know. There are no trade secrets at all.
But I always thought the same thing. When I was at Channel 6, look, the other stations talked to me, but whenever my contract was up, they didn't have an opening, or when they had an opening, my contract wasn't up. And I thought, what are they worried about me, like taking all the secrets of how to be number 3, to go to another station?
Right.
Whatever. Bob, what do you have?
2 kudos. First is the quick one. Uncle Jack, thanks for watching.
Uncle Jack.
I said I'd give you a shout out when I was back on the show, and I'm giving you the shout out. The second is to Rhode Island PBS, our host. Last night, I get to go to the premiere of the second documentary on water fire, Art and Soul of a City. The first was done 10 years ago. Joe Rocco produced. Our producer today, Mary Steele, was the writer for that show. A phenomenal, and it is on, if you're watching at 7 o'clock on Friday night, stay on this channel, because at 8 o'clock, it will have its premiere.
Bob is our new promotions director. He knows the whole schedule.
If you would rather watch it online, you go to pbs.org, not ripbs.org, and it'll air several times over the weekend. It encapsulates the 30th anniversary, 30-year history of water fire. Now, I've got a conflict to disclose. I went back on the water fire board a few months ago. I had been on that board, believe it or not, I ended my 6 years on that board 15 years ago. Water fire is a phenomenal economic engine and artistic endeavor for this, not only the city but the state. Brings people all over the world. But we're going to need some help, or this documentary will be their eulogy. You know, we're up against it. Corporate sponsorships are harder. We're going to have to do a lot to keep the fires burning into for the next 30 years. But the documentary will tell you the story, and kudos to Joe and Mary and everybody who was involved in that work. It is phenomenal.
Beautiful. What do you have?
So by outrage of the week, of course, the Revolution wind is now pile driving off the coast of Rhode Island, and they are attacking the oceans. We're seeing the whales come across. It is not going to make that big of a difference in our energy needs, maybe 1%, and we're killing off the oceans. It is a tragedy. It is not going to help us with our energy needs.
Are you a card-carrying member of Save the Whales? Did
I am a
know that?
card-carrying member. I am an
You're an
environmentalist from the get-go.
We have just a couple minutes left. Dan, Providence, the city, you've written about this. You've covered Providence for years. So a couple things going on. The state takeover, Mayor Smiley says maybe another year. But this whole deal with the money that, the city's shorting it. Javier Montañez puts out this blistering YouTube video, which the mayor said is not productive, and then he gave him more money. What's going on in Providence?
Well, this is an age-old problem. I've been calling Bob Walsh about this for a decade now, because it is true that as state money increased for education funding across the state, not just in Providence, cities and towns repeatedly failed to increase their funding at the same pace. And so much so that it is true. Warwick now pays more money to its school system, Warwick as a city government, than Providence pays to its system. It's a huge problem. It's something that needs to be fixed. I think what the mayor is talking about here is, one, I don't have any control over my school system, so why am I going to give this much more money? They're asking for $26 million more dollars. Can't do that in one tax increase. You literally can't do it. And so I think there's a bit of a challenge there, but it's a reasonable fight, and there's good arguments on both sides of it.
Okay, to be continued. Folks, that is all the time we have. Bob, nice to see you and Uncle Jack again. Sue and Dan, always great to see you. Finally, this week, we have some sad news to bring you. We lost a longtime member of the Lively family earlier this week. Lou Pullner died unexpectedly Monday at the age of 66. Lou, who we leaned on for legal as well as political analysis, began his career as a prosecutor in the Attorney General's office before moving to private practice. He and I sat through the Buddy Cienki trial 20 years ago when he was the legal analyst for Channel 12. Lou had joined us on this set just a few weeks ago as part of his regular rotation on Lively. Lou pulled no punches on this program, which is what made having him as a panelist so enjoyable. I chose Lou to be on the first panel after I took over as moderator of Lively back in 2016. But beyond that, we texted off air many times, musing about the latest crazy story and a lot during college basketball season. I will miss him deeply, both personally and professionally. Please join us back here next week as the Lively experiment continues.
lively experiment is generously underwritten by.
Hi, I'm John Hazen-White Jr. For over 30 years, A Lively Experiment has provided insight and analysis of the political issues that face Rhode Islanders. I'm a proud supporter of this great program and Rhode Island PBS.